Welcome to my newest tutorial. This time we will be painting something slightly different. I have few tutorials back then done in more looser style, not so precise, not so perfect, and time has come again to do it again, something more looser, more freer, and rose painting done in looser style, not so precise, but still concentrating on tonal values, playing with colors, adding some cooler notes in lighter areas with clean ultramarine blue, and adding more violets to shadow area. Let's dive in. For this tutorial, I'm taking 300 GSM hot pressed paper. Line drawing is already done on the paper surface. You can download it. Be careful when you're transferring, all details are important. And with an elastic eraser, by rolling over the whole surface of rose line drawing, I'm removing some excess amount of graphite off the paper. This is very light rose, especially at the outer edges where we have those graphite lines. And I'm taking white eraser and slightly, without any hard pushing, erasing more graphite so it's very, very pale. Almost only you can see where's the edge of each petal. It is important to have as less graphite as possible in watercolor painting. Mixing watercolors. For the first mix, I'm taking manganese violet with a little touch of permanent rose or any pink pigment that you have, testing on a piece of paper, because always pigment mix looks slightly different on paper. Second mix is very pale manganese violet, clean manganese violet. Third is small amount of permanent rose. Adding more to the first mix, so I have more of this pigment, and again testing on a piece of paper. Adding a little bit more to the first mix, and for the third mix, permanent rose with a little touch of ultramarine blue, diluting with water, adding a little bit more of both pigments. Now to painting process. For this rose, I will be using, especially for first layers, this bigger brush, round synthetic brush, size 9. It allows for wider areas to apply water and smoother watercolor layers. Starting with water, be sure that your water is clean after mixing watercolors. And while I was preparing for the painting process, my watercolor mixes became already dry, so I add a little touch of water to make them alive again, and I'm ready to paint. Starting from one petal and applying watercolors from the shadow area of this petal and moving towards the lightest part. And still, even in shadow area of each petal, watercolors are transparent, not too saturated. Washing my brush, cleaning in paper towel, and smoothing the applied watercolors towards the outer edge of petal. We need a lot of light on the outer edges, as we see from reference photo. And in this case, as I'm painting much looser, playing with colors, my reference photo is a guide for tonal values. Color a little bit, but mostly tonal values. I see where each petal is lighter, darker, and remember that in the beginning, in the first layer, we leave light area much wider than it appears in the reference, because with more layers we will make that light area slightly smaller. If we will leave it from the beginning in the same size as it is in the reference, we will lose light area. It's important always keeping light area wider. While surface is moist, I'm adding little folds that I see from reference photo, using same brush, same watercolor mix, which is manganese violet and permanent rose. Moving on to the next petal, approach is the same. First I apply water, then watercolors, and my reference is a guide for tonal values. Where are shadows and where are lights? Applying watercolors very lightly on the outer edge to make this petal appear curved, light in the middle, and shadow on both sides of petals. Removing, if you have watercolors in the middle part while the surface is still moist, you can lift out watercolors with clean and dry brush. Continuing with next petal, again, approach is the same. Be careful because each petal is different. Each petal has its own curves, its own tonal value, its own light area, shadow area. So following reference for tonal value is important for each petal separately. There are no two identical petals in this rose or in any other rose or flower or leaf. In one composition, each has slightly differences because light source is one, but subject areas are multiple and how light is hitting on each surface is different. I ran out of watercolor mix of manganese violet with permanent rose. No worries, you don't need to mix in the beginning huge amount of watercolors. We can always mix again knowing which pigments we were using. That's why it's important to make watercolor mix notes, which pigments were used, and we can always mix again. Even if the color tone will slightly be different, no worries. Especially these kind of paintings will only benefit from slightly different color tones. And moving on to next petal, approach is the same. Water layer of clean water, and then loading my brush with watercolor mix and applying from the shadow area. Now, as I approach smaller petals, little sections, I'm taking smaller number 7 round synthetic brush and moving forward with this brush. Again, reloading my watercolor mix on my color palette, manganese violet with permanent rose. And continuing with last petal for the first layers. First layers are applied and we need to continue by darkening shadows. I'm taking more of permanent rose and adding ultramarine blue, a little bit more of ultramarine blue, and I have more darker, more vibrant violet watercolor mix. Separately, I want to add a little touch of ultramarine blue. Be sure that your water is clean. I need clean ultramarine blue in this case. Permanent rose, clean permanent rose, and Sennelier red. I'm adding this red pigment. You can use cadmium red or Winsor red. I will add it a little bit to the shadow area to make shadow warmer, and blue will be added to the lighter area to make light area cooler. And my surface is completely dry as I move forward to the next layers of each petal. And using round synthetic brush, applying watercolors again to each petal separately, and I will be applying watercolors concentrating mostly on the shadow area. I want to build shadow area more vibrant, more darker, more intense, so that this rose start to look more three-dimensional with depth. Now it's very pale, but again, if you like the result at this point, you can really stop here. I also like this stage of painting of flower for this looser style. It looks very fragile, transparent, and for some painting styles, this is very beautiful. For example, for wedding invitations, for summer celebration, like a very quick, beautiful illustration for some event or maybe a present. Painting further with watercolors that I have on my mixing palette, and I'm building shadows more darker. I want to go a little bit further here, but you can choose. You can stop at this moment. You done first layer, and this is also a nice practice for first layers. From this point, you can also go into more realistic result, more accurate result by painting more finer, more transparent layers, but I will be continuing with looser style, being a little bit more crazier with colors and approach how I apply them. Here I'm taking my bigger brush, number 9, for bigger petals, wider brush strokes, more smoother layers. Adding clean permanent rose to the area that I had watercolor mix of permanent rose and manganese violet. Painting with bigger brush for wider brush strokes. Careful, again, painting from the shadow area and pushing watercolors towards the lighter part. Be careful not overpainting to the edge of other petal. With clean and dry brush, smoothing applied watercolors. Smoothing instantly. As you apply, you smooth instantly. Other way, the layer that you applied will get dry pretty quickly, and it will be much harder, sometimes even not possible, to smooth it. So as you apply, wash your brush, clean it in paper towel, and smooth the applied layer. I always do that. Apply watercolors, wash, dry, smooth. It's like a mantra. Apply, wash, dry, smooth. Separating petals, applying shadows, going more into contrast, building layers. And for more precise brush stroke, I'm using finer tip brush and applying, washing, cleaning, and smoothing applied layer. Adding to my mixing palette, permanent rose, and a little touch of Sennelier red. I want to add red, as I mentioned, to make shadow area warmer and keeping light area cooler. This also helps to separate what is light and what is shadow. When you have light cool, shadow warm, or opposite. Opposite is very rarely. Most of the time, references which are taken in daylight are cool on the light area and warm in the shadow. Taking big round synthetic brush number 9, which should be clean and water clean. I want to have clean ultramarine blue layer, transparent layer. It's important to apply transparently. You can use any blue pigment, unless maybe indigo would be too dull and too not so vibrant for light area, but ultramarine blue, French blue, cobalt blue, even turquoise blue will be very beautiful in light area, but those layers should be really light. It's just like a little hint of very cool blue layer, and I'm using bigger brush so that my layer is very even, smooth, adding a little touch of water to ultramarine blue that I have on my mixing palette and applying to all light areas that I have in my composition on my painting. All petals have a little area of light, so everywhere where I see light, I apply ultramarine blue. Zooming in closer to paint center part with stamens, I'm taking in Indian yellow and lemon yellow. Using finer tip brush, adding lemon yellow to stamens, and we will be also adding main mix of manganese violet with permanent rose to make slightly darker watercolor mix for the center part, because we see that even more in the center, deeper in the center, the area is darker in yellow color. And stamens that are visible on the upper part around the darker area, I'm adding lemon yellow and painting them. Applying to the whole area, and when this area will be dry, I will add more details to make those stamens more precise, separate them one from each other. Now we have center, which is the darker one, the deeper part of the center, and then we have upper stamens that are more away from that inner deeper side, and they are more brighter, the same we see in the reference as well. You can zoom in closer reference to study how those stamens look, how they appear, how they are separated one from each other. And I added to my main mix, manganese violet and permanent rose to Indian yellow, and applying on the petals around the center part next layers to make them more contrasty, add tonal values and add precision as well. Some areas are even not painted at all, like this petal center part still missing color. Applying, smoothing applied layer, and while I'm smoothing I have this transition from darker to lighter area. I apply watercolors on the shadow area, like here, applying on the shadow area of manganese violet and permanent rose, washing my brush, cleaning in paper towel, and smoothing applied layer towards the lighter part. And while I'm smoothing, I have this transition of shadow, halftones, and light. Moving forward, I am now in the stage that everything is dry, like 1000% be sure that your painting is dry, and I want to remove even more of graphite lines that I see in my composition. I don't want to have some graphite lines that are still visible, so careful without any hard pushing. You can erase at this point, but be sure, like completely sure that your painting paper is completely dry. Center part is dry. I waited 1 to 2 minutes and it's completely dry. If you need to wait longer for some area to dry, it means that maybe you are using too much water. And now, using watercolor mix of Indian yellow with main mix of from petals, I'm adding a little bit of shadow to stamens, separating them one from each other, adding more depth to the darker center part. Then as I study reference photo, I noticed that on the lower side of the center, there is area that is way darker, much darker. So that's where I'm taking permanent rose with ultramarine blue and applying layers of watercolors between petals, right under stamens, and adding depth, adding darkness, building contrast. Also painting, while I'm adding this more darker watercolor mix, I'm correcting edges of petals, making them more precise, more crisp, and working on contrast, working on tonal values. Using yellow watercolors that I have on my mixing palette, I'm adding yellow spot that I see. This is like little corner on the petal, and we have it in reference. You can add it, you can leave it out. It's your painting, your choice. Zooming out to see the whole painting, and I will be painting a little bit further by building shadow area more darker, more intense. See how it will go. You can stop any moment. Loose watercolor painting style don't have quite some very strict rules like botanical painting. There's some areas that you just can't stop and quit. You need to build till it's that the viewer can tell, oh, that is violet rose, that and that specific name of that breeding of that rose. You need, from botanical painting, you need to see what exactly is shown. With looser painting style, it's an illustration. It's more for pleasure. It's more for some maybe invitation, pattern making. You can make a pattern for fabrics, for stationery, even for wallpapers and bigger pieces, for advertisements. And there are no rules unless you like it, I don't know, maybe who is ordering from you or customer is enjoying your looser style. It's up to you to paint and to set your own rules and boundaries, where you stop, how long you go. With realistic painting, it's a little different story. You need to have a realistic result to represent what you are doing. And here I'm pushing a little bit further with shadows, tonal values, contrasts, to make it more contrasty, richer, to add some more of violet color tones. Also correcting some edges, petals. It's your painting. You can stop or you can paint further. We are painting transparently. It is possible to stop at any point or continue pushing to more realistic result. Adding ultramarine blue to my color palette with a touch of permanent rose. I want to have a slightly darker watercolor mix for shadow area. Adding transparent yellow to my color palette and adding more layers to stamens, some details, depth to my center part. Last brush strokes, last layer to this rose painting. For me at least, it is challenging to paint looser. I see it slightly more complex as I used to, more precision, accuracy, layering, and when I'm painting realistically, I know what I'm doing. I know what I need to be doing by looking in reference. With looser style, you need to have a little bit of imagination. Where are the boundaries? What do you want to, which boundaries you want to break? And time to time, I'm really liking making these more looser paintings. Hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something new and tried this rose. Thank you for joining and see you in my next tutorials.